matters is at night, and the Hilchot Nida shares in the morning. Okay, one Mazel Tov to Mr. and Mrs. Ephraim Case in Ellenbogen upon the birth of a boy. Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. Very nice. Very nice. Tonight's Shmuz is sponsored L'Zeicha Nishmas Rivka Bas Yeshua and for Refuah Shalema for Simcha Avram ben Mindel. Right before Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, the pasuk says something unusual. The pasuk says, "Vayu shneim arumim," they were both naked. Ha'adam v'ishto, man and his wife, v'lo yisbashoshu, and they were not embarrassed. Rashi explains that the reason why they were not embarrassed, despite the fact that they were brilliant, despite the fact that Adam was able to decipher the inner nature of each individual animal, Hashem brought each animal in front of him, and Adam deciphered the essence of the animal and summed it up with one word, demonstrating his brilliance to the Malachim. Despite being highly, highly intelligent, they were not embarrassed. And the Sforno explains why that is. It says the Sforno, Ki aza yukol polosam v'chol ivoreim, all of their actions and all of their limbs, lasos v'som konim bilvad, were only focused towards serving Hashem. Every action, every thought that they had was completely focused on serving Hashem. Lo lahasig tanugas nefsados, not for the passing pleasures of this world. Therefore, the Sforno explains that their organs, all of their organs were to them as our hands and face are. And he says the pulas azivog etzlam, the being together man and wife, to them was pulas achila v'shtia, was like eating and drinking, meaning they were not animalistic. There was none of the normal animal drives. They were so lofty and so holy that they were not consumed by the normal passions of man. They were not embarrassed because they were so above what we understand as a human that they were able to procreate. They were able to be together without the normal animal drives. Hence, they were not embarrassed. Similarly to our hands, our face, were not embarrassed. That was their entire entity. So clearly, the Sforno is telling us that they were on a very, very high madrega, very different than man is now. Interestingly enough, after they ate from the Eitz Hadas and they were thrown out of Gan Eden, the pasuk says to us, "Vayas Hashem l'kim la'odam l'ishto." Hashem made to man and his wife kosnos or, cloaks of hides of leather, vayil b'shem, and Hashem clothed them. It says this on that pasuk. Why is it that Hashem clothed them, and why do we need to know that? Shalayigarshim arumim. Hashem did not want to throw them out of Gan Eden naked. Pen belavshim achakach, because if they themselves were thrown out naked, they would have dressed themselves afterwards. B'hishtadlusam, with their attempt. Yachshavu, they would think shesifu mala, that they added a new madrega. If they were sent out of Gan Eden naked, they would in fact be embarrassed because now they had an animal instinct, now they had taiva. They would make clothing for themselves, but when they made clothing for themselves, they would think that they now added a new maila. They're on a higher madrega. They're now bali tznius. And because of that, Hashem did not want them to make that mistake. Therefore, Hashem, before kicking them out, made clothing for them so that they left Gan Eden wearing clothing. So what the Sforno seems to be saying to us is something very different than this first Sforno. What this Sforno is saying is that had they put on clothing, they would have felt that they're on a higher madrega now than they were in Gan Eden. Now that we have a sensitivity towards tznius, now that we feel embarrassed, we put on clothing, we feel higher, we feel more holy. Hashem wanted them to understand that that's not correct, and therefore Hashem made clothing for them. And the question that I think begs to be asked on the Sforno is that sounds very difficult to understand. Clearly, they sinned. Clearly, before the chait of the eating from the Eitz Hadas, they were on a totally, totally different level. They were so pure, so holy, that they were different than any man, any woman that we know now. And they sunk dramatically. They changed their inner essence. They introduced a nefesh bahami, a physical drive, and they lowered themselves substantially. How is it possible that they could put on a cloak and say to themselves, now we're on a higher madrega, we're on a higher level than we were in Gan Eden, when the only reason they're putting on that cloak is because they're on a way lower level. And yet the Sforno seems to be telling us that that's why Hashem clothed them, that apparently they would have made that mistake. And I'd like to see if we can answer that question this evening. Now, to do this, I'd like to bring up an interesting philosophical position. One could easily argue that by studying a creation, one can tell by its functionality what the intention of its creator was. If one studies an item, studies what its use is, one can tell what the creator intended it for. So for instance, if someone were to pick up a pen and say this is a very handy-dandy toothpick, and they put it into their mouth to try to prop out some object from the teeth, they would quickly see that it doesn't function very well as a toothpick. I mean, gee golly, who needs this thick stuff? And when I get good and back there, I get that gooey blue stuff all over my mouth. A very quick study of it would indicate there's a clicker, there's a cartridge inside, there's ink. Oh, I get it, it's a writing implement. By its functionality, by what it does, you can tell what its creator intended it to be. It was created to be a writing implement. So too, if a person studies Adam, if a person studies man, a person can divine what it is that Hashem intended man to be. And I'd like to share with you two rather obvious questions about man, because I think those two questions will help us focus on what it is that Hashem wants for man and what it is that Hashem created man to do. Question number one is as follows. Why is it that man is not happy? Now, that is a very interesting question in our day and age. In terms of objective well-being, and objective well-being means what sociologists call dwelling, death rates, dollars, and diets, man has never had it better. We live in a generation of opulence, of wealth, of extraordinary opportunity, and man has never had it better. Yet in terms of subjective well-being, how happy you are, is life good, seemingly it's a downward spiral. Now this observation is not a new phenomenon. Bertrand Russell wrote a book. He was a philosopher in the 1930s. He wrote a book, most of which was lamenting the fact that most people are unhappy. Study after study indicate that Americans as a body are largely unhappy. Professionals estimate that between 10 and 15% of the American population are genuinely happy, meaning the other 85 to 90% of the U.S. population are unhappy. And you have to ask yourself a question, gee golly, why? We've got everything, life, health, even the ability to pursue happiness. Why is it that so few people are happy? Question number one. Question number two, which I think is equally valid, is why is it that man is never satisfied? Now we all know the Gemara, Misha'islo Mana, one who has 100 wants Messiah, wants 200. But if you study man, you see a very interesting feature. A man can be wealthy beyond description, have more money than he could ever spend in a lifetime, and be ever seeking more. And it's not just money. You'll read about kings. Generation after generation, a king was the monarch, the despot, totally in charge. And for some reason that's difficult to understand, he went to war to expand his boundaries. Now, what's your problem? You got it made. You're the king of the country. You're the law. You're the rule. What do you have to risk it all? Maybe you're going to die in battle. Maybe you lose your country. What are you risking it all? You need to expand. Why can't you be satisfied? And you see this feature in almost every endeavor, in almost every pursuit, in almost every venture. Man is never satisfied. If you're wealthy, if you're a king, it's obvious. But if you're a plain person like you and I, you'll see the very same phenomena. We are never satisfied. We need better, we need more, we need to increase, we need improved and enhanced, and man is never satisfied. And I think it's a reasonable question to ask, and that is, why not? Enjoy life, kick back, you got it, you made it. Why can't you just be satisfied with what you have? Now, in a previous Shmuz, we mentioned something Mesilas Yesharim describes as what I call the princess and the peasant mushal. Mesilas Yesharim describes that if you want to really understand man, you have to understand the following mushal. He says, imagine the following. Imagine a princess who's brought up on satin and silk, in the greatest finery, greatest luxury, somehow ends up becoming lost in the woods, and she ends up marrying a plain commoner. Now this commoner, being a good guy that he is, tries to bring her everything. He tries to hand carve beads for her, and he hand carves a vessel for her, and everything that he does for her. Says the Mesillas Yesharim, is that princess going to be happy? Is she going to be satisfied? Mesillas Yesharim says it's obvious that nothing that he could bring her is going to have real value to her. Why? Because she was brought up in finery. She was brought up with the greatest luxuries. Whatever he brings to her is going to be coarse. Says Mesillas Yesharim, that is a apt mushal for man in this world. All of the luxuries, all of the pleasures, all of the wonders of this world that you will consume, that you'll bring to yourself, will not bring you satisfaction. Why? Because there's a part of you, there's an neshama that's not satisfied, that enjoys nothing of this world. Like the princess who's brought beads and has brought coarse beans, the neshama enjoys nothing from this world. And in fact, the Mesillas Yesharim says that should bring you to an interesting question. We know that everything that Hashem does is for the good. And we also know that Hashem does everything even in this world for the good. Yet it seems that the neshama should hate this world. The neshama should feel in this world like a foreigner with just coarseness and everything distant without any pleasure. And the neshama should hate this world. And the Mesillas Yesharim says it might, unless something is done for the neshama to understand something differently than most people do. And that one change, we'll get to in a moment, what it is that will allow the neshama to actually enjoy its stay, not in Olam Haba, but in this world. But to get there, I want to make one more observation. Every evolutionist is supported by an altruist. You'll find the big evolutionist, he's the big doctor, such and such and such and such. He chairs a university, chairs in who knows how many different courses, etc. And you'll also find on that university the name Morgenthau or Spillman or Goldstein, who supported the university, who supports the evolutionist. And the reason why that's very interesting is because the evolutionist is supported by the altruist. Now, you know why that's interesting? Because altruism means to give. Altruism means not to take care of my needs, but to take care of your needs. Whether for real, truly altruistic reasons, meaning I'm really generous, or for my honor, but I'm taking care of you, not me. And the reason why it's ironic that every evolutionist is supported by an altruist is because it's contradictory. According to Darwinism, there is no such entity called altruism. In a dog-eat-dog world, in a survival of the fittest world, it's me against you. The one who's the fittest survives. The one who's the greediest, most selfish, self-centered son of a gun under the sun is going to be the victor. Altruism means to give to someone else. According to evolutionary theory, it can't exist because it's the opposite of survival of the species. It's quite distant. And yet, every university has its Morgenthau's, has its names on the campus, supported by people who either really believe in it or give money for honor. And if you think about it, it's not just really altruism, but it's any human personality trait cannot be explained by evolution, because things like anger, jealousy, emotions that are so thin don't just evolve, they're created. And I think there's a point that goes a lot deeper for us and cuts a lot more interestingly to what we're talking about. The Orach HaSadikim says, if you'd like to understand why it is that man is never satisfied, he says, don't you understand? That's the proof. The proof that Hashem created man for the world to come and not for his state in this world is that feature in man. If in fact Hashem created man to exist on this planet and after we die it's all over, then you're right. You would have a wonderful question. But if in fact Hashem created us to grow, if Hashem put us on this planet to accomplish, to reach levels, and then Hashem put an inner instinct within us for exactly that, then, says the Orach HaSadikim, life itself makes sense. Do you know why it is that man is ever pursuing more and better and needs enhancements and improvements? That's because there is a part of I that know that I was put on this planet to grow, put on this planet to accomplish, to reach levels, and there's an inner need within me to reach those levels, to reach those heights. And those desires are what keeps man ever searching and ever driven to grow. Now, that being said, those drives can either accomplish their mission or be diverted. There is a psychological term that is very relevant, and that's called sublimating. The Rambam describes it: if a person has a teva v'rotzeach, if a man has a nature of being a murderer, he can either become a murderer or he could sublimate, he could channel that desire differently. He could become a moel, he could become a shochet, he could take that drive to spill blood and channel it more appropriately. You may have noticed in our society some examples of sublimation. I was in the airport and I noticed a woman who said, "Baby, baby," so tenderly, so kindly, "Baby, baby, come here, baby." And then she took her water bottle and she poured it into her hand and she held her for her little French poodle. "Oh, baby, oh, boo-boo, boo-boo. Here, drink, 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 mama. Oh, that's so sweet." If you see people treating their pets like children, you're watching a maternal instinct, a very powerful, wonderful instinct that Hashem put in the human being channeled in a very funny kind of way. And it's not just the pet clothing and the pet novelties. Here's an expression, but this psychologist writes the following: they will protect their children and worry about them as fiercely as a normal person would a child, and when they die, they will grieve for them no less than a parent would grieve for their child. And if you don't believe it's true, Hallmark has its bereavement section, has cards that you send to a person who lost Nebuch, their pet. Fido, I feel so terrible. I found this on a website. It's not just pet cemeteries and pet urns, pet memorials, and pet condolence cards. Ashes to Ashes. You can now, and you can find this on the web, Ashes to Ashes. The Pet Loss Care Package is designed to help fill your time of grief with meaningful healing activities of journaling, remembrance, and ceremony. If that's not good enough, how about a memory pendant? It's a beautiful and thoughtful way to celebrate the life and keep the memory alive of a cherished pet. If that's not quite enough for you, how about an angel's destiny? Our website is devoted to letting grieving pet owners know that they are not alone. Let a friend, family member, or loved one know you care by sending a pet bereavement gift box. Accent the memorial garden you've created in your companion's honor with a dog angel or cat angel. But they're serious. This is not comedy. This was not written, because Rabbi Schaefer needed a laugh during a Shmuz. This is real stuff, and people really send these pet condolences cards because they've sublimated, they've taken a very holy, good instinct and channeled it incorrectly to a dog, to a cat. And when you take a very fine feature that Hashem placed in the human and you misdirect it, what you do is you take away one of the very basic drives and instincts that Hashem gave us to grow and accomplish. Every human being was created with a drive and an instinct to grow, but very many people misuse that. Many people take that drive to grow, and what they do is they sublimate it into things like money, like honor, pursuit of luxuries, pursuit of reputation, getting my name bigger, getting my reputation out there, making myself into someone. And they take a natural sense of growth that should propel them to really become a great person, and they sublimate it to something else, and it leaves them in a very interesting way. I once read a book of a young black fellow who grew up in the 1920s in America, and he described something I had never experienced. He said when he would leave his home in the morning, there was nothing to eat. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. There was no food to eat. So he described that he would go to a white man's house, go to the garden hose, turn on the water, and drink. Fill up his belly enough so that it would stop the hunger pangs for a while, and it worked. And he described that it would take away his hunger pangs until the water would pass from his body, and then he'd be more hungry than he was before. And gentlemen, that's what happens to a person who sublimates a natural instinct for perfection. When a human being has a desire, an inner need to grow and accomplish in a very real, significant manner, and they misdirect that, they channel that to other things like the pursuit of luxuries or money, reputation and honor, they do get a certain sense of gratification. After all, I'm a big name, I'm a big shot, look who I am. So that in a certain level, they feel that need. But very quickly, they feel more empty than they were before, because that doesn't fill the soul. The soul is empty because at the core of my essence, I know it's false. At the core of my essence, I have money, I have luxuries, I have honors, but I know in my essence who I am. I'm not really growing. I'm not really accomplishing. I'm taking that drive that Hashem gave me to be really great, and I'm misdirecting it. Hence, I end up being more hungry than I was before. And if you wonder why it is that 85 or 90% of Americans are unhappy, it's because they don't understand life and they don't understand the human. If you want to be a human and you wish to be happy, you must grow, because that's the instinct that Hashem put into you. And you could do everything under the sun, but if you're not growing, you will not be happy, because that's not the way Hashem designed you. And you could sit there with your French poodles and go, baby, 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 but when you tuck your French poodle in at night and you lay your head on the pillow right next to it, you're not going to feel very fulfilled, because that's not the attachment that a mother has to its child. You're changing, misdirecting, falsifying a natural instinct. And so too, when a man has a powerful instinct to grow, an instinct that will allow him to really accomplish, make himself into the great human being he's supposed to be, and he misdirects it to every other thing, like the acquisition of wealth, acquisition of power, or anything else, he will not be satisfied, he will not be happy. If you'd like to know the answer to the question, I think it's really quite obvious. You see, Adam and Chava had a very, very great need to grow. And they blew it. And they blew it big time. Given one mitzvah, one commandment, and they didn't do it. Not only did they not do it, they were thrown out of Gan Eden, changed themselves radically. And I have to imagine that they walked out of Gan Eden with a tremendous sense of guilt, a tremendous sense of emptiness, and they had a real sense of, we messed up. If they were sent out naked, they would have then put on clothing. And putting on clothing, they would have had an opportunity to misdirect a certain sense within them. They would have said, look at us, we're now Bali Tznius, we're now modest, we're living on a higher level. When we were in Gan Eden, we were living on a low level, like animals, we were naked. Now we're human beings, look at us, we're dressed, we're on a higher level. Even though in their essence they knew that they were on a much lower level, even though they knew the only reason they're wearing clothing is because they're on a lower level, but there is a need to grow, and there's an ability to sublimate that growth, to attach it to an external object and say, we've reached it. And there's a certain level of gratification, a certain level of fulfillment, when a person is able to attach that growth to an object and say, look, I am on a higher madrega, I'm wearing clothing. Even though they know it's not true, even though in their core essence, if you'd push them against a wall, they tell you, we know we're not on a higher madrega. There's an ability to fool oneself. There's an ability to attach to the external experience a sense of growth. And Adam and Chava would have felt that they have a new Maila. They're now Tznius. They're now on a higher level. Well, that's, I believe, Pshat in the Sfurno. I think that has a tremendous lesson to us in our situation. I've seen it more than once, where a fellow in yeshiva was a big masmid, very involved in learning, very involved in davening, growing in Yerushalayim, everything great. Finishes his yeshiva years, goes out in business, and then he starts doing well. Starts doing very well, making money, hand over fist, his business growing, everything's great. All of a sudden he's not learning, not davening particularly well, certainly not growing in Yerushalayim, and he's shrinking dramatically. And I believe that phenomena is not that rare. Would you like to know what I believe is at the core of that phenomena? It's really quite simple. When he was in yeshiva, his growth was oriented to real, pure growth. Growth in yira, growth in learning, growth in serving Hashem, growing as a person. And that need to grow was being filled properly. He left yeshiva and he got a new channeling of his energies. He's starting to make money, reputation, company, look who I am. Now his need to grow was being met with other things. No longer did he wake up hungry and say, I have to grow internally and become somebody, because his need to grow was now sublimated to many other things, including reputation, money. Hence, one of the main drives of the human was being misdirected, mischanneled, and our masmid went from the fellow who's learning and growing to be stagnant, because that core, that need to grow, was now misdirected, mischanneled into money and to other things. And that, I think, is a very important lesson to learn, because the key to a person's success and growth is this need to be a bigger person, to be on a higher madrega, to grow. If you're going to misdirect that need, if you're going to misdirect that desire to grow, then what's going to happen is you're going to lose a powerful rocket that could propel you to heights. Won't if you misdirect it. But the misdirecting, the mischanneling is not just in money or acquisition of wealth. There are many other ways that it can be misdirected. There is something that we call here in yeshiva externalization of the religious experience. What that means in plain language is a fellow wakes up one morning and says, I'm not growing. I'm not enough. I have to be bigger, better. And he does something that may be very destructive. He puts on a gartel, puts on thick payas, puts on a black hat, whatever his externalization is, and likely he cripples his growth. Why? Because I used to be a regular guy. Now I took on this extra thing. I put on the black hat, put on the payas, put on the gartel, put on a long coat, and I have now arrived. I am now frum. Now that I'm frum, I'm there. Now that I'm there, I don't have to grow. I already have grown. And not just, I'm certainly better than you, I'm bigger than you, and I look around and you're not doing it, so I'm okay. And that, my friends, is a very dangerous thing. I've heard many, many times from the yeshiva that externalization, what we call chitzonius, is a very damaging and very dangerous thing. Now, a caveat, it has its place. Putting on the black hat, putting on the payas, putting on the gartel has its place and can be used appropriately. If, in fact, you're going to use that as a demarcation, if you're now going to take a step up and buy into the whole package, I'm going to put on the hat, I'm going to put on the garter with whatever it means, and that means I'm now going to operate on a greater level of religious observance across the gamut, and this is the sign for me, this is my forward movement, and this is what concretizes it for me, then you may very well grow from it, and it may be a good idea. But the damage and the danger is very, very rare, very real. Typically, or certainly often, when a person does that, that becomes the religious experience. The hat, the jacket becomes the religious experience. And no longer do they have a need to grow because they've now expressed it. It's now been fulfilled, and they've lost that need to grow. Again, it has its place, and I'm not speaking against it, but I am speaking against the focus of it and allowing it to become the center of your religion. Now, if one can sublimate his need to grow in terms of misdirecting it towards money or towards externalization, I think in our day and age has become a new way to misdirect your need for growth. And I'll share with you something that I heard in the name of Rav Noach Weinberg. He said as follows: if you find a 5-year-old who's acting like a 2-year-old, immediately what happens is the parents become concerned and they put the child under observation. If you have a 10-year-old who's acting like a 5-year-old, it's even more serious, needs intervention. What happens when you have a 15-year-old who acts like a 7-year-old? They already talk about institutionalizing the child. Says Rav Noach Weinberg, what happens when you have a 65-year-old who acts like a 15-year-old? That's called retirement. And if you study retirement communities, and I've been there and I've seen it, it's play all day. In fact, they're called vacation village because that's like what you're supposed to do because you're now retired, no longer have to work, and you play. And if you go down to these retirement communities, and I've been there, you see the 70-year-olds riding the bicycles, and they'll go to the minion, that's nice, and the rest of the day is playtime. I had a woman say to me as follows: it's like a sleepaway camp for adults. It's great. All day long, we have activities. But she was 70 years old. She was 70 years old and she was serious. And they do activities all day long comparable to 15-year-olds in camp. And that is the American dream. Retirement. No more responsibility. No more having to go to work. I can play all day. If you would like to retire in that way, then I wish you kol hakavod. You have a lot of company and you have a great society in which to live, but you have to understand that a 65-year-old acting like a 15-year-old is perverse. It's rather strange. And what kind of sense of satisfaction do you have if I'm the king of the shuffleboard? Ha ha! Mahjong, that's my game. Oh, don't compete against me in wiffle ball. Oh, forget it. I'm going to be the king. And by the time it gets serious, tennis is already a big game already. But you have to appreciate the fact that when you're 70 years old and you have das and you have understanding, there's not much satisfaction that you feel when you're filling your time with silliness, empty silliness. And it may have a certain appeal, and it's a nice idea for a week or two, but very quickly you understand that the American dream is bankrupt. And if that is the dream that they're selling, it is a very difficult dream to buy into. Benjamin Franklin had a very interesting line. He said as follows: retirement is fine as long as it doesn't interfere with your work. You see, Benjamin Franklin had an understanding that a human being is supposed to accomplish. He's supposed to have goals. He's supposed to have objectives. He's supposed to have real things that he's working on outside of how he makes a living. And I have a very interesting question that I offer to you to ask yourself. And that question is, what am I going to do when I retire? What am I going to do? Now I want you to think about this. If your entire life is consumed with working, there's a car magnet now that's running around, and it says something like this: I used to have a life, but my job ate it. If you used to have a life and your job ate it, I want you to understand what that means. You will spend 40 years consumed by your work, no matter what that work is. Lawyer, doctor, Indian chief, you're going to be very, very involved in your work. And there will come a time when your work stops. And the core essence of who you were, everything that you occupied yourself with, everything that you felt fulfillment with, is now gone. And now what are you left with? Bored, empty, playing shuffleboard with the rest of them out there in your retirement community. And the reason that's a very important question to ask yourself now is because if you allow yourself to get drawn into that track of making your livelihood your life, what you'll find is it will become exactly that. Your entire life will be the nursing home that you work in, the accounting firm that you're a servant to, the lawyer partnership that you're involved with, and that will be your life. And when you retire, your life will have ended. You'll find yourself empty. And the reason that's an interesting question to ask yourself now, what am I going to do when I retire, is because a person needs to be growing at every stage of their life. A person has to have very real interests, very real objectives, areas that they grow in. And that means the person has to be growing in midos, and that means taking stock of who I am, working on my anger, working on my humility, working on my generosity, making myself into a bigger, better person. I have to have other areas that I work in, my Yireh Shamayim. And that means I work on my davening. I don't just show up. I work on davening, and I work on the various Musar exercises, and I get to a point where I'm a bigger Yireh Shamayim. And I certainly work on learning. I get more involved in learning, spend more time in learning, because I have a life outside of the way that I earn my livelihood. And gentlemen, the big chiddush here is, this is not just a way to get into Olam Haba. This is not just a ticket to your world to come. This is a ticket to this world. If you wish to enjoy yourself on your stay on the planet, this is the great secret. What the Mesilas Yesharim says is, the neshama hates this world, and the neshama will always hate the world until you explain to your neshama one simple concept: I can grow. Once the neshama gets it, once the neshama understands that I really can grow and am growing, says the Mesilas Yesharim, the neshama will love this world. Why? Because every day is a sale day. Every day is an opportunity to grow. Every day is an opportunity that I can become a bigger, better person. Then, says the Mesilas Yesharim, the neshama doesn't hate this world. Quite the opposite. It loves this world. And that, says Mesilas Yesharim, is what Hashem had in mind. Hashem would not create a creation against its will, against its teva. Hashem doesn't want me to hate my life. Hashem wants us to love our life. But if you're not growing, if you're not accomplishing, if you're not becoming a bigger person, you will not enjoy life. If you wish to enjoy your stay on this planet, you have to grow. That's the nature of the person. I think it's a tremendous lesson to learn from Adam and Chava. They were tremendous people. But Hashem knew that if Hashem throws them out of Gan Eden naked, they would now put on this clothing and they would sublimate that need to grow. They would feel, I put on a milo, look at me, I'm about tznius now. I've reached a new level. Even though they know that's silly, but there's such a need in the person to grow, and it's so easy to become external. It's so easy to peg it on something, and now feel that I'm better, I'm okay. And Hashem Kaviyachol was afraid of that fact. If you wonder why it is that 85 to 95% of Americans are unhappy, It's for one simple reason. Study the man. Study the person. Just like a pen is a very poor toothpick, the human being is a very poor hedonist. The human being was not created for pleasure in this world. As a recipient of pleasure, as one who studies and pursues pleasure, the human being has been poorly created. If you wonder why it is that Misha Islo Mana, a man who has 100 needs 200, a king who has an entire Medina, an entire nation, needs another one, because that's the need to grow. The Aruch HaTzaddikim says that's the proof that we're B'nai Olam Haba. The proof that we're created to grow is the fact that we have such a need, such an innate desire to increase and get better ever more. And a person has two choices. They either use that drive to grow and accomplish, or they sublimate it. They mischannel it, misdirect it. And you'll see many manifestations of funny misdirections. And that's when you're watching that woman with a dog saying, poopy baby, and you're watching a powerful maternal instinct. A mother will give up her life for a child. You know what psychologists say? They testify that a fully sublimated woman is capable of giving up her life for her pet. She'll go without food so that her pet Fido shouldn't be hungry. And that is a very sad manifestation of a very great midah. But so too, there are other ways to sublimate. If a person has a need, a desire to grow, and instead of putting that where it should be, they pursue honor, they pursue luxuries, they pursue money, or any other form of making themselves feel good. I'm a published author. I write papers. I'm an academician. I have all kinds of titles and degrees. I'm a wonderful person. Anything other than real growth is misdirecting, falsifying, and that leaves a person more hungry at the end of the day, like our young fellow who drank from the water to fill his belly, but once the water passes, he was more empty. If a human being tries to grow by accepting honor or money, he's going to be more empty than he was at the beginning. He'll never be satisfied. He'll never be happy. Hashem created us to be happy, but that the method to be happy is to grow, to accomplish, to use the tool called the Adam for its intended purpose, namely to grow and accomplish. I'd like to close with a story that Rabbi Hanach Teller told me. And it's a very interesting story that if you know the participants in it, becomes even more interesting. He told me as follows. He said, in Rav Aaron's day, a certain gentleman came to Rav Aaron Kotler for a shidduch for his daughter. And he was a very prestigious balabas, and he asked Rav Aaron for the best bocher in Lakewood. Now this was back when there may have been only one or two best bocherim in Lakewood. And he went in and sat with Rav Aaron and asked for the best bocher. And Rav Aaron was going through different names. And at a certain point, a certain young man walks into the room. And they're talking about this one, that one, and this young man walks out. And this young man walks back in. Walks in, walks out. And it was clear that this young man had constant entree into Rav Aaron's office. And it's very clear that Rav Aaron and this young man had a very real connection, a very real shaychus. So as this balabas is asking Rav Aaron about this name and this person, finally the balabas turns to Rav Aaron and says, what about that bacher who keeps coming in? Obviously he has a real connection to the shiva. He seems like a very chashuv bacher. What about him? Rav Aaron turned to this balabas and said, do you know, if I would not keep a constant eye on that person, he would blow up the world. I have to keep my eye on him every minute. Would you like to know why that story is interesting? That young man grew up, got married, moved to Eretz Yisrael, and created one of the most powerful Torah networks in the world. He is the sole force behind one of the most powerful Torah networks ever created, and he did something very interesting. You see, he had a very powerful nature, and Rav Aaron understood his nature. And what Rav Aaron was doing was training him. That nature used improperly, he would blow up the world because he was a very powerful person. But he was able to channel that energy appropriately, and he built a Torah network of unimaginable proportions because he took a powerful drive, channeled it appropriately. My friends, there is probably no more powerful drive in the person than a need to grow, to feel satisfied, to feel that I'm somebody. Take that need and appropriately use it. Take that need and channel it to grow internally, to grow in real things that last. Don't sublimate it. Don't let it get misdirected and misappropriated, pushed off into all other things. Focus it properly. It'll bring you to the skies. Ultimately, it'll bring you to great satisfaction in this world. Ultimately, it'll bring you to Olam Haba. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us the wisdom, understanding, and ability to put this into practice in our lives.